Welcome to another museum FAQ video. I'm Paul Orselli, President and Chief Instigator of POW, Paul Orselli Workshop, here on Long Island. And I'm delighted to be joined today all the way across the waves in Germany. Hopefully the magic network here. I hate to jinx it, but so far so good. Delighted to be joined by Joe Cook. Hello, Joe. Thanks for taking the time today. So I always like to start out the videos by having people tell us a little bit about their background, because especially people in the museum business, the route they take is usually circuitous. And so if you could start us out by sharing a little bit about your background, and then we'll launch into the main part of the conversation.
Sure. So, so I started out in museums about 7.5 years ago now at the Mid-Hudson Children's Museum with Laura Litchfield Kimber was the one who brought me in. She's fantastic. And that was technically my start into the museums. And before that, I was essentially a fabricator. So, and then, well, the all the way backstory is when I was growing up, I grew up in Oklahoma City, and my best friend's father was, I believe, I don't technically know what his job was, but I believe he was the curator for an Air and Space Museum that was connected to a smaller science center. Now that is the Oklahoma City Science Center, or Oklahoma Science Center, I think is the name technically. Back then it was called the Omniplex. But now the Science Center is much bigger, and the Air and Space section is very small. But anyway, so we would go there, he would bring us into work, and then we would just have free reign over the place. And that was where I kind of fell in love with interactive science centers. And then as I grew up, I still found myself, I was living in Boston, and I would find myself as a single 18-year-old kid in Boston going to the Museum of Science on a Saturday by myself, which is pretty weird to find an 18-year-old kid who just by themselves for their own free time wants to go there.
That's why you were still single.
Yeah, that's probably why I was still single. But so anyway, so then I did that, and then I moved around a bit, but science centers and interactive museums in general, and all museums really, were always part of my way of life. And then I ended up, after many, many years in Brooklyn, building sets and scenery for photo shoots mostly. And then we ended up building a small traveling museum that I don't know if it's still in business. The guy who built it was a little bit kooky, so there's no guarantees. It was a Hudson River museum in the back of a van. And anyway, so that was really technically the first exhibits that we built, and then we ended up doing a lot of sort of traveling shows, these pop-up things for brands, essentially. And those were basically exhibits. They're things you're touching and moving. And anyway, so then I was upstate. I moved upstate with my wife, and we met. I was at this party, this really funny party in upstate New York, and they were the place I worked was building rustic cedar gazebos and things, we were going in the woods and cutting down cedar trees and then building furniture out of them. It was a really wild job. And we won an award from a local magazine, Hudson Valley Magazine, which is like the same thing as Time Out, more or less. And they gave us an award for the best company building rustic cedar furniture on Route 212 near Saugerties. So there was no real competition. It was just an award to get so that my boss would give them $200 and we'd have a booth. And the Children's Museum won an award for best free family fun, because they had a family free night. So it was a similar award. And anyway, Laura was walking around this party, and my boss was off getting a beer like he usually would be doing. And I was standing there alone, and she walked up, she said, "Oh, wow, interesting stuff. Do you guys build exhibits?" And I looked around for my boss, who was no longer there, and I said, "Well, we don't, but I can." And she said, "Oh, can you?" So anyway, she said, check the website, apply, blah, blah, blah. And so I ended up getting the job, and had 5 wonderful, wonderful years with Laura, doing a lot of great work at Mid-Hudson. And then I saw a random thing on LinkedIn one day for a job here in Germany, working with ttinger interactive exhibits, and didn't know that much about them, didn't know that much about Germany, but I have 2 young kids. And
so let's just pick up from upstate New York and move the entire family and our 2 young kids to Germany. That's a natural progression.
Yeah. So anyway, I texted my wife, and she said, "Okay, go, you can apply. That's okay. If you get the job, I won't get mad." And I didn't really think much would come of it, to be honest, but lo and behold, I ended up here. And so now I'm here at ttinger in Nuremberg, Germany, working as an exhibit developer. But really, my job is, exhibit developer is kind of a hard word to use for my job, because it's a lot more than that. I mean, in some ways it's sales, in some ways it's R&D and prototyping. A lot of times people just want to come pick my brain, because there's not a lot of people in the company who have worked in museums. In Germany, it's much more rare to see someone go from a museum into a business, and vice versa, especially because of the way the trades work here. The guys who work in the woodshop here don't start out as something else and end up in the woodshop. They start out in the woodshop and maybe end up moving. In our company, at least, they can move throughout the company, which is nice. Right now, the guy who's the head of the workshop, who's in charge of all the planning of the workshop, he was in the woodshop. So, and one of our project managers now used to be one of the electricians. So people move within the company, but in Germany in general, it's more rare to see people changing so dramatically what they're doing.
All right. So here you are, happily ensconced, you and your family in Germany, and you are with ttinger, and I've had the good fortune to actually visit ttinger world headquarters and visit Nuremberg and mix it up with some of the folks there. So that's great. Well, thank you for sharing your background. I was going to tease you. I was going to say, well, maybe the reason they hired you in Germany is they heard that you made rustic wood furniture with wood you had cut down for free or found along the side of the road. Maybe that would catch on. They thought that would catch on in Germany. But anyway, today, yeah, that's, maybe you never can tell. I'll ask Axel about that next time I see him. What we want to talk about today, building on your background, and you come into this business honest by knowing how to make things and use your hands and think with your hands and be creative and solve problems. That's great. So you might have heard, we have this slight problem that's concerning the museum business right this minute, but a lot of people are upset about it. So I figured we'd do this video to sort the whole thing out. So
perfect.
We've only got a few minutes, so let's, so I just thought it would be interesting, from your perspective, now international perspective, what you are thinking, because obviously maybe not all of the business that ttinger does, but certainly a significant part of it, I would imagine, relates to interactive exhibits, however you want to parse that. But there are these rumblings that you hear. I'm sure you hear it, and I don't know, maybe it's not as big a thing in Europe, but the idea of a touchless museum, which just the terminology makes me want to recoil in horror, because it just seems like horrific.
That museum, it was called the Vatican.
Yeah, well, whatever. The Louvre. That's right, the Louvre.
Yeah.
They have people in uniforms, and if you get too close to anything, they hit you. But
Yeah.
leaving that aside, I'm wondering, just to start out the conversation, how you balance, which I will admit is a legitimate concern. People are concerned about going back to museums and, gee, is it safe to touch things? But this, what I would consider a knee-jerk reaction, not, oh, we're going to help you create a touchless museum, or we've got some great new designs for hand sanitizer stations. They look like a little elephant that comes out the trunk and stuff. I've seen those. I'm like, oh boy. How we balance that with what I think is our perspective, your and I, like, well, one of the ways people learn is by touching things or tactile things or let's say multi-sensory ways, and to just shut that off or shut off a significant aspect of that learning just doesn't seem like a good short-term or long-term move. So with that messy start, I'm wondering how you might respond to that, or how you and your company are responding to that. Maybe things are, like I say, are different right now in Europe, but what your initial thoughts are about this sort of balance between being respectful and mindful of people's legitimate concerns, and not just totally saying, oh, all right, well, just turn off all those touch screens and move all the interactive exhibits out to the warehouse. We're done with those.
Yeah, well, I mean, on the one side, I can say that definitely they should turn off all the touch screens and put them out in a warehouse. But I don't touch screens and touch.
But don't hold back. How do you really feel?
That's a different conversation, I think. But yeah,
just
I mean,
we'll put in an email address so you can send the hate letters to Joe directly.
Sign me up. I will happily receive them. So yeah, I mean, I think so. We're working on a few planning projects right now, and in general, our approach has tried to stay as much the same as possible, and really focusing on the learning outcomes as much as we can with given content streams, right? So if we're working on energy galleries, say, we're more interested in thinking of the learning outcomes than the interaction of the way in which the exhibit is interacted with, right? So, we really want to focus on that open-ended as much as possible, or like giving people that constructivist approach. It's if you're designing a totally touchless exhibit, say, trying to figure out what the technology is you use that's touchless, but also keeps that learning outcome is really what's complicated. And the truth is, I've not actually read any very good evaluations on some of the better touchless exhibits I've seen. So I can't definitively say if anybody's learning anything or if they're just having fun. And on the one side, just having fun is okay, but museums in general, I think, can't forget that they're not just entertainment complexes. I was just reading something interesting the other day from a children's museum in the States, that they make this point that now with the COVID stuff, everybody is saying museums must stay closed, but entertainment complexes can be open. So somehow a skee ball machine is okay, but an interactive exhibit is not. And
well, they have those new skee balls with antimicrobial
bronze skee balls.
Yeah, whatever.
Copper skee balls.
That's right, copper.
Yeah, so I mean, typically our approach is to try to stay as much the same as possible. I mean, in general, in Europe, there's definitely, the regulations are a bit different. And in some ways, museums are allowed to be a bit more open with what they're doing. But the truth is, as of yet, most people aren't that interested in going. We have friends in a bunch of the museums here in Europe, and they're not filling up with people at the moment. I think everybody is still feeling a bit wanting to side and not wanting to go into anything that's
concerned.
Yeah,
And like I say,
true.
we need to be mindful and respectful of that. Well, just because I feel like I can push back on you a little bit.
Sure, yeah.
Play devil's advocate here. I mean, what would you say to someone who, after they heard you say, basically, well, we're trying to keep the focus on the big ideas and the foundational concepts, but still basically keep the same approach towards interactivity that we had pre-COVID. Somebody might say, well, you're just engaging in the same wishful thinking that people who say, well, COVID's just going to go away. So how would you respond to that?
Well, I think everyone has to look at things from a long-term perspective. So first of all, if someone's coming to us today to start a planning project for something, we're looking at a bare minimum of 1 year until the exhibits are going to be in the museum and open. So you have to think, okay, what is my museum going to look like in 1 year, and what's the COVID situation going to look like?
Yeah, who knows? People don't know what things are going to look like practically a week from now. So
no, that's very true, right? I mean, we're dealing with problems with installations on stuff that we thought we could have had done, we planned to have done months ago. So of course, that's a complicated question, like where are things going to be in a year? But if you then look at from the museum's perspective, of say 2, 3, 4 years, and if you're investing $2 million, $1 million on a whole new giant gallery exhibition, even $200,000 on a small gallery exhibition, if you're really talking about spending that kind of money, you have to look at it from this perspective of long-term payoff. And the truth is that the coronavirus will not be here forever. It just won't. Either somehow we all end up with herd immunity, which doesn't look very probable, or enough people end up vaccinated that it's just the numbers aren't so stressful anymore.
Well,
and then I guess
who knows?
Being like an all-time like optimist. That for me, I have to look at it as life will improve. So that's the thinking about it is like, well, unless your idea is we're going to throw it all out the window and just do this whole fresh new thing, and we really want to be totally fresh and different. But then I would make a pretty big argument that what they need to end up doing is probably renting a warehouse and doing some serious evaluation work and serious prototyping work and spending serious amounts of money on that. Because in the end, if you end up with just an entertainment space, I know there's companies who are doing it now where it's these interactive entertainment spaces that are more or less touchless. Okay, but is it educational? And how are you making it educational? I know you've seen, and I've seen plenty of exhibits that are all shadow interactives, right? They're just all these motion interactive things. And there's one behind you right now in Museo, and you're maybe moving some things and changing the environment, but do kids understand? Yeah, that's the one. Do kids really get the educational value of that? I don't know. Like I said, I've never read.
Well, I mean, the thing is, I think you could say there are good examples and bad examples of those types of experiences. And also, I don't know that I want to go into any venue, whether it's, quote, an entertainment venue or museum or what have you, that only has one sort of monochromatic type of experience. It's like, oh, okay, here you can jump around and make a dinosaur move, and over here you can jump around the same way and make a whale move. yeah, I mean, I get that they're different, but really, are they different? Like you just changed the skin. So I think, maybe the variation, but the other thing that I just think it'd be, again, be interesting to get your reaction is both in terms of short term and long term, what the value proposition that the museum, or if you want to say the marketing pitch that the venue is offering. Because short term, if you say to me, well, okay, we're just going to cover up all the touch screens and we're going to remove half of the interactive exhibits or all the interactive exhibits and just put them in a warehouse and add more floor graphics so that people can distance from each other, and add more sanitizer stations, whether they come out of an elephant's trunk or not. Is that really a good pitch? It's like, okay, look, we've got half as many exhibits as we had before. All the touch screens are turned off. We've filled up the empty space with more hand sanitizer stations. I mean, like that seems like the worst business pitch in the world. I mean, is that going to make people who are hesitant about coming inside, or who want to be excited about coming inside? Is that really going to make the case? And then how do you build from there long term? I mean, I'd just be curious, like where marketing and perception figures into this discussion in your mind.
Yeah, I think that is a pretty complicated point. Convincing people to come back is tricky, and I've seen obviously a few different approaches to it at this point. I mean, I think on the one side, people are either going to be dying to come back, or they're going to be like my wife, and they're not coming back for a very long time, no matter what you do.
I mean, I don't blame her. Here I am on Long Island, within a stone's throw. Well, I'd have to be a really good thrower, but nearby to New York City, and some of arguably the world's greatest museums pass. I'm a museum person. I love museum persons. I don't want to even get on. I mean, I could drive into the city, but I'm like, I don't know that I want to go to any of those museums yet. Because it's not just the museum. It's also like, okay, is everybody in there behaving themselves? Are they wearing masks? Are they behaving in a health positive way?
Yeah.
And, if not, what am I? I'm going to get into an argument in the dinosaur hall at the American Museum of Natural History with some guy. Hey, put your mask on.
Put your mask on. Yeah.
Forget it.
Yeah. But so that said, though, I think on the one side, the thing that museums should be, if I was still in a museum, if I was still with Laura at Mid-Hudson, it would really be about taking a very close look at what are those interactions and which of those interactions are worthwhile. So if you're talking about taking out half of your exhibits, then I think it's just as an example. I'm trying to estimate like what we had, and if you really were trying to socially distance.
Although in many museums, if they took out the bad exhibits, that might be a net positive. So
that's my point, right? So if you really look at like the content in a lot of museums, if you're being honest, if you're being really, really honest, not I wouldn't say most, but many museums have plenty of things that could go away. And I think they know it generally. I've never, ever been critical of someone's museum and had them coming back and say, well, I just can't believe you didn't like that exhibit. They always say, well, yeah, we all know that that's a terrible exhibit. Yeah, we've seen it together.
Aunt Susie's Kitchen. We just can't, take it away. I mean, people love that butter churn, and
yeah, they were a funder, and she donated $1,000 in 1981.
That's right.
Gonna stay. so anyway, so I think if they really look at it, then it could be an opportunity for thinking about, okay, we get rid of 25% of our exhibits, but then we let them be gone. And in the meantime, we work on what are we going to fill in later that's going to have a greater value and a greater impact.
Well, let's shift the scenario to a more,
Okay.
let's maybe finish up on a positive note here. So let's say you were, you're working with a new museum who is going to open a year from now, or what have you, and I'm gonna really give you the perfect scenario, or maybe a really good scenario. No, no limitations. Whatever you want. Like, budget is not a consideration. You can play with the space. You've got a really strong cast of creative partners on the client side and the people working with you. I mean, if you were starting literally with that warehouse and you could test and evaluate, I mean, I'll just say, not every fabricator right out of their mouth is like, you need to do more evaluation and prototyping. So kudos to you personally and Huttinger in general. But if you were starting out literally with the box, and you know we're starting off in this COVID time, but okay, we want to do something new. Everybody keeps talking about, oh, we can't go back. This is a new era. Whatever what does that mean? Like, how thinking in a positive way and a practical way. Okay, what would you do? You're king of exhibits now. What would you do?
In a totally blank slate interactive museum. I mean, interestingly, what I would probably do, which it's of course terrible to say, I would just copy Children's Museum of Pittsburgh somehow.
Well, problem solved. Okay, we can end the video there.
but so an explanation for that would be that they do such a nice job of integrating art into their interactive spaces. And that's a really interesting way to think of, if you're trying to create more negative space that's not wasted space, but it's touchless space. That's a pretty interesting way to handle it. And so their stuff isn't, if you go in, I forget what the gallery's called, but there's this gallery that's got their anti-gravity room and slides, and they do have a touchless interactive exhibit in there. But anyway, in that space, they've got like 3 or 4 Warhol paintings. And so, of course, in the way that space is set up, it's not, the paintings are just using a wall it's not about social distancing, but it's an interesting way to think about it, to think, okay, how can we create negative space without making it space that feels wasted to the visitor?
Well, or to create a rhythm of experiences and spaces, so that deliberately here's a space or a time to be more observing or contemplative than whizzing down a slide. But obviously they can coexist, so that's interesting.
Sure. Or even the idea that you've got something that within a 6-foot diameter, you have something that's interesting to multi-generations at the same time. So if you've got an exhibit that a little kid is going to be fascinated with, rolling balls down a track over and over and over and over, what is the parent doing? Well, maybe there's something lovely for them.
They get inside a giant ball on a giant track, so that now we're talking. This is new museum interactivity right here, baby. Okay, I think that's good. It's tricky. I deliberately gave you a difficult charge, giving somebody a blank sheet of paper and an infinite budget and an infinite schedule is actually maybe not a good thing. There need to be some kinds of constraints to breed creative responses. But maybe let's, again, in a positive spirit, maybe you could call out some other types of places or spaces. You just called out the Children's Museum of Pittsburgh, which I am also a fan of. Are there other, and they could be non-museum spaces, are there, or just generic types of spaces or activities that you think have a place in thinking about entertainment and museum venues, which maybe that's the same thing, in a post-pandemic world?
Places that I generally think are really good. I'm always pretty critical with a lot of places.
Oh man, maybe there's only maybe you can count them on one hand and have fingers left over. But I'd still be interested. I'd still be interested. I mean, are there also?
I mean, I have to say that and it's a bit of a guilty thing to say because it's like tooting our own horn. But I'm a very big fan of this gallery that we built at Experimenta 2 or 3 years ago now. That we built this children's gallery on the top floor there, which Experimenta, for people who don't know in the States, is it's like the biggest science center in Germany now. And
in Heilbronn,
yeah, and it's 4 floors, and the top floor we designed and built the whole thing, and it's meant to be the children's gallery. And it's funny that we talk about evaluations because we're like maybe a month away from getting back all the evaluation reports from Elza Bailey and George Hine, who did the evaluation for that space, which is really, really great, and we're excited to see. But what I like about it is it's a children's gallery, but it's not called a children's gallery. It's called Explorers Land. And so everything is built for little kids, but it's really like a science center for little kids. There's not a bunch of scenography. There's no little grocery stores. There's none of that. It's just real straight up classic, as much classic science center exhibit style stuff, all designed for kids. And I'm a big fan of it. My kids really loved it.
Yeah. It's a really,
I can call out.
I was going to say it's a really, and I don't mean in a like treacly way, but it's sweet. It feels very welcoming. It feels very accessible in the broadest sense. And it seems like the kind of place, and from what I've seen, and I got to visit there too when I was in Germany, the kind of design that fosters cooperation between people, whether they came in a group together or just natural interaction between strangers, which again is sort of a strange thing to talk about now when, the idea of interacting with strangers and moving outside your familial or your household pod is that. But nevertheless, I think you are right. That space is very successful. As we say in YouTube land, that will be one of the links or references we will include in the description below. So
another one I really, really like, I have to say, is Technorama in Switzerland, which is essentially classic exploratorium, pretty much verbatim, and literally on the exhibits it says built by Exploratorium. I think Exploratorium built a lot of the stuff they have there, and they have a pretty significant workshop. They build a lot of stuff too, but it's very classic science center.
But with a very, very high artistic and aesthetic gloss.
Yeah.
I mean, it's almost, I almost wouldn't even call that museum a science center. It's almost like a phenomenological art museum.
Yeah, somehow. So that's another one that I would call out as actually being very good. I would obviously, I've never had a bad time at the Exploratorium, but one that I really loved recently was the Fort Collins Discovery Museum, I think, if I'm remembering the name correctly.
In Colorado.
Yeah. And they took and merged like 3 different museums into one. And I think it was all designed by Gyroscope. And it's really great because essentially 2 or 3 of the styles of museums I would never ever go into, right? Like one was like the Northern Colorado Historical Society. So I'm not driving from Denver to Fort Collins.
Yeah, or I'm not even walking. I'm not even walking across the street to go to that museum.
Yeah. But so it's done very well in that I would guess it to be about 50% interactive and 50% just display style, like classic style museum, and it's done really well, in my opinion. That it's a nice mix of the two, and the fact that they're all under one roof, I think is quite nice, because I wasn't there with my kids, but I could imagine with kids, you go have this interactive experience that's so busy and full of energy, and then you can go, actually they might enjoy the quieter experience, looking at things and learning about stuff from objects perspective, and they might actually be able to enjoy it a bit more. I mean, my poor children, I'm dragging them to like the Uffizi Gallery in Florence, and they're so bored by the time you see any of the like really good artwork. Yeah. I mean, we went, this was great. My son wanted to see rocks, and we were in Vienna. So we took him to the Natural History Museum of Vienna, which is really one of these super classic natural history museums, just these display cases full of stuff.
Acres of glass display cases lined up.
Yeah. And the funny part was he really just wanted to see the rocks, and he wanted to see some dead birds. I don't know why. And so we really went through the whole museum, and I think it was about 20 minutes. But we went to every gallery in 20 minutes. So anyway.
Yeah, but he left happy.
He was very happy. Yeah.
There you
are.
I've
never seen so many asteroids under one roof.
Yeah, there you are.
Years.
Well, maybe where we ended up here is a good place to end up. And what I'll take away from the museums and the situations you mentioned in a positive light is maybe the future, whatever that is, whenever that is, actually involves sort of mashing things up, like art and children's museums, or phenomenological science centers, or a phenomenological art museum, or a history museum that's now deliberately been mashed up with a different type of interactive museum or what have you, but also to mash up the types of experiences, that there's not just this monochromatic touchless future, but that there is this rhythm to experience. So I think, of course, as always, the devil is in the details, but that's why people hire us. So
maybe
this is yeah. After this video, maybe not. Well, at least we had a lot of fun during this video, and I appreciate
it. Was worth it.
I know.
Totally worth throwing my career right down the drain.
That's right. Yes, you'll be getting, after this comes out, you'll be getting called into HR and Hoodinger for, I'll be getting a stern legal email about taking this down off of YouTube. We'll see. So if you are seeing this, make sure you watch it fast. Thanks, Joe. Always nice to
thanks, Paul.
See you and have a chance to speak with you. Best to you and your family, and
you as well.
Maybe sometime in this magical future, whenever that is, wherever that is, our paths will cross safely in person.
Someday.
Who knows? We missed Excite. this year, which
Yeah.
was, well, we missed
all
a
of it.
whole bunch of things this year.
Yeah.
And the year's not even over yet. But
Yeah.
but who knows? I think, as you said earlier, it's important to try and find the optimistic and the bright aspects of the future, and not just continually peer into the pit of despair and think that we're never going to get out of that, because that there are lots of serious things that the pandemic situation has laid bare or made more apparent to some people. And we can't go back to how things were.
We can't go back, but we also can't just dwell on it. We have to.
Exactly. We can't just sit in the bottom of that pit either. So, well, well, the conversation was fun to me. Hopefully it's fun to the viewers too. We'll find out the analytics, what they tell us. Speaking of evaluations, so there we are. Okay, thanks again, Joe. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Paul.
Yeah.